What are subtle red flags at a job interview that say, working here would suck? I came in for a job interview at 7:30 p.m. The entire staff was still in the office. Should have known right then that 9 to 5 was not ever going to happen. One day I worked until 2:30 a.m. to finish up a big project, and my boss said to me I could come in an hour later the next morning. Gee, thanks, bro. With my public transport and travel time, that gives me a solid 2 hours of sleep instead of just the one. Edit. With all the stories and the reactions on this post, I just wanted to say that there really are good employers out there. Do not stand by being treated so poorly, because you deserve to be treated with respect. For any employers reading this thread, here's a few examples of how to create a loyal, healthy employee base. My current employer puts family first. If there is an emergency at home, they tell you to handle that first. For example, when I was miscarrying, they told me, I do not want to see you in the next 2 weeks at least. Take your time and give me a call when you feel ready to come back in, okay? 9 to 5 means 9 to 5. If you have to leave early for something or come in later because of something, they expect you to take your own responsibility. And don't even check if you actually catch up the lost time. They just expect that you do. By doing so, you create that on the rare occasion that you do have to stay late to finish something, you do that without complaining, because it only happens incidentally and not structurally, and certainly isn't expected. In fact, they ask if you really have to stay late, or if you just think you have to stay late. If you both give and take, you're much more likely to give back. They frequently and genuinely ask about your well-being. And then also follow that up. If you tell them your mother is unwell, they ask about her a week later. It's not lost in the abyss that is business. No, you feel seen and heard. You look stressed. Is there anything I can do? Do you want to go over your to-do list together and prioritize what needs to be done first? Things like this mean the world to me. One time they walked in and said, hey, my afternoon meeting got canceled. I know you have like 15 files that need checking, and I've seen how full your calendar is. Why don't you give me 4, and I'll make sure they get sent out today to lighten your load a little. They focus on little tokens of appreciation. A chocolate Easter bunny waiting on your desk at Easter. Last year they had 10 Easter eggs in every room. I found one hidden in the box of my crackers. They make sure your salary is paid before Christmas, even though you normally don't get paid before the 26th. They make sure every secretary gets flowers on Secretary Day. They bought us weird pens. Think bright neon colors with dangly beads on top, just because they thought it would brighten up our days. Like, it only costs a penny, but it makes your staff feel seen. When there's a heat wave, they treat us with popsicles. When it's holiday season, they randomly decide to close the office at noon on December 31st. If we have to earn it in the last couple of hours of this day, we're doing something wrong. So let's just shut down for the day. Have a good one, guys. They do not tolerate gossip. We talk with each other, not about each other. They hire capable staff. People who are not putting in the work or effort do not last. They will ask us about people's progress, like, what do you think about the new receptionist? And we can answer frankly, even if our opinion is that they're not making enough progress, etc. They want to know what we think and they value our input. This creates a healthy work environment with driven people who all have heart for the cause. Mistakes are human, and we solve them together without smack talking about the person responsible. Of course we all have our bad days, and it's okay to mope and mumble here and there to your roommate, but we really try to keep that to an absolute minimum. Story 2. I once showed up for an interview and the manager wasn't there that day. No one called me to let me know. The assistant manager was not apologetic for the scheduling issue at all. She was literally just like, oh, she's not here today, in a tone that suggested I should somehow already know that. She said they would call me to reschedule more sometime in the next week. I told her I was currently unavailable Monday through Wednesday, but could come in anytime Thursday to Friday. She said if I couldn't make the time for the interview, I probably wouldn't be a good fit. I said okay, and I went on to my other interviews and ended up working elsewhere. You'd think that would be the end of it, but both the manager and the assistant manager badmouthed me to a few other people in the industry, including one of my friends. Hello? I made time for an interview. You disrespected me by not calling me to let me know it was canceled. I gave you the times I was available to reschedule, and that was disrespectful somehow? You know, I had a somewhat similar experience to this, and I even called in to double check that it was still going down. And they're like, yeah, come on in, you're gonna be a star, kid. So I drive down there, and I ended up waiting like 2.5 hours because they weren't ready and there was some sort of miscommunication on their end. They also said some weird stuff in the interview. I wasn't a big fan from Jump Street. I, however, did not stand up for myself. I got the job, and it was just as disorganized as you would expect, and it was a very unfortunate experience altogether. Lesson being, as I'm sure we'll hear more about in these stories, you can tell a lot about a place before you sign the W-2. Story 3. I interviewed for an independent contractor position on a piece rate. It's hard to predict how much you're going to earn on a piece rate. So to attract me, the manager showed me some pay stubs from his guys. I noticed that, 1, he could easily cherry-pick pay stubs to show me his best guys' best weeks. All that tells me is that I'm likely to make less than what he's showing me, at least on average. 2, the pay stubs were obviously designed to be confusing. They were a full page and absolutely covered in data. He wanted me to be impressed by a dollar amount, obviously not accounting for the costs which the contractor has to carry or taxes which the contractor has to deduct and pay, but he took them away before anyone could have deciphered what the pay period, piece rate, number of jobs, or KMS was. 3. He showed me other people's pay stubs. WTF? Another red flag is that they were desperate to hire because they didn't have enough contractors to deliver the work contracts they'd already sold. I had 2 guys from different offices call me after I declined the position who apparently still thought I was considering it. Story 4. I once interviewed for a job wherein the interviewer actually directly told me that the job was extremely stressful and they'd had a slew of new hires quit within a month or 2. The job was at a psychiatric hospital. I thanked her for being honest with me and said that I was not interested. As she was walking me out, she leaned in and said, "You're doing the right thing. Our last hire quit because he said he was having palpitations all the time here and was worried he would have a heart attack." About 3 years later, at another company, I saw one of the women who had interviewed me. She worked in a totally different position in a totally different setting. She said that the other woman who had interviewed me, the one who gave me the warning, actually did suffer a heart attack. She survived and she stopped working there. I was just so thankful she warned me. Most interviewers wouldn't do that. Edit. And in thinking more about that woman, obviously she was very stressed and she was having to cover work for that position that needed to be filled. She could have easily and understandably have gone into survival mode and thought, you know what, let's just hire her, meaning me, and then at least I will have some relief for a month or 2 until this one quits as well. But she didn't do that. She thought of my welfare, a stranger over her own interests. And clearly she was suffering. I would have relocated for that job too, about 150 miles. She was aware of that. Maybe that played into her decision to warn me, maybe not. Either way, she was an extraordinary person. Story 5. Receiving a job offer without a real interview, or even directly after the interview. That's usually a sign of desperation on the employer's end. Also avoid anywhere that says, "We're like family here." Also avoid any position that doesn't have a clear job description or says something like, "The incumbent is responsible for other duties assigned as management sees fit." They will make you their female dog. Edit. To all those getting caught up on the exact wording of other duties as assigned, what I mean is, if they give you a very vague description of the job or not exactly sure how to answer your questions or have 3 bullet points of job description and then it's all other duties, or if they can't give you examples of other duties, be prepared to become that company's female dog. Story 6. I was told we want long-term employment. Don't just leave after 5 to 6 years. Okay, what do you pay and what about raises? His response? $12 an hour. 3 to 4% increases every year. Nope, told him I'm all set. This was an armored truck service. I had to carry my gun and wear a vest, which they did offer to pay for. They just took it out of your pay. $600 for a handgun, $400 for the vest. You had to possess a permit to carry prior to applying. I went back to private EMS. Same pay, but I didn't have to protect other people's money with my life for peanuts. Edit. My issue with this is that it seemed like a place that would absolutely abuse you if anyone ever found out you were looking somewhere else. We want long-term employment and will pay you crap. To me, this means we will retaliate and make your life hell if you ever try to leave. Story 7. I had a job interview with 2 people asking questions. One of them brought questions for the wrong position. Things I found out later. The person on the IT team who had been with the company longest had been there just under a year. Their turnover rate was higher than McDonald's, over 50% turnover annually. They had a goal to get it down to 40%. Bonuses only get paid 1 year after you've been there. For a full calendar year, that only starts counting on January 1st. If you get hired January 2nd, 2020, you wouldn't get your first bonus until 2022. There was no manager for the programmers. There was no director for the IT team. They had tracking software for your every keystroke, idle times, programs you were active in. They would question idle time, which meant people on the phone with clients would be questioned often because their computers would be idle. There was a lot of going wrong, but the interview slip-up wasn't enough to really give it away in time. Suffice it to say, they didn't meet their turnover reduction goal. Story 8. The game is changing with work from home becoming the norm. The old tactics of checking the break room and office decor no longer apply. The usual standbys are still there. Check the benefits, the time off policy in particular. How does vacation, sick, and float work? If it's a large company, is paternity leave paid? Or is maternity leave even a thing? If there's no retirement policy, then that's all you need to know. If there isn't 401k matching, it's also not a long-term deal. With the work from home situation, are they really explicit about how excited they are to return to office? Ask how they are enjoying work from home. Is remote work interfering with their business when it shouldn't? That's concerning. You get a sense of the organization's leaders as being out of touch based on this sticking point in particular. Are they offering to provide a budget to provision your home office? That's your green flag that they've thought this through. Most of this applies to office jobs, mostly because manufacturing and service ate crap in the US decades ago. Cubicle life is the new factory worker, so don't expect pensions and lifetime positions anymore. Story 9. The interviewer blatantly stares at your boobs and his co-interviewer's boobs during the interview. Or interviewing for a role and not being offered the role. Then, randomly several weeks later, completely unexpectedly and out of the blue, getting a message in your spam folder about interviewing for another position with a sister company, and it has a date and time request that has already passed. You email the contact back and apologize for missing the message and ask if there is still a chance to come in for said interview. They get annoyed with you and tell you that if you were expecting an interview request, you should be checking your spam folder. A few choice words back and forth for that person and never applying at that company ever again. These were both management roles in professional corporate organizations. Story 10. Did an interview at a university a while back for a faculty position. At the point of the interview process where I met other members of the department's faculty, they were telling me about and laughing at 2 previous interviewed contenders for the position. They were obnoxiously cruel, insensitive, and boorish as they mocked the previous interviewees. Their behavior around a total stranger who was also interviewing for the position told me everything I needed to know about them as professionals, human beings, and potential future friends. I was offered the job. I took a different position at a different university and never looked back. Story 11. I don't think I've necessarily had any subtle flags. I had a lot of interviews over the past year, and some made themselves really obvious as to when it would be a bad idea to take a job. They also tend to be the employers that ghost you afterwards. They were always the ones that wanted interviews in person as well, despite the majority of mine being remote. Memorable ones included a 10-minute interview where the person didn't ask any questions of value. One where the employer suggested I should take my mask off, didn't have a clue what he needed for a person to fill the position, and then made sexist comments about not wanting to hire a woman, that his daughter who was my age told him off because he was politically incorrect, and how it was a lads environment and couldn't be doing that without changing his behavior. One where the door buzzer didn't work, and only a passing employee managed to let me in as the interviewer hadn't given her number. During the interview, she said she had just taken over all aspects of the business and fired about 4 warehouse people without warning, as they weren't 100% occupied at all times, and just told them it was time to go. One who had a lot of negative reviews online as a retailer about how he cheated his customers. When I got there early and was preparing, a member of staff came out and knocked on my car to tell me to come in. They made me do a test that was essentially free labor, and the interviewer asked terrible questions that didn't cover relevant experience, made sexist comments about how he didn't want to hire women who would just sit in the office and drink coffee all day. When I challenged him about the company's reputation, came up with conspiracy theories about competitors paying to ruin his business. He'd fired someone that week for being a drug addict and someone else who came in trying to improve the business, as anyone who told him how to run it could just F off. And that's only some of them. Story 12. I have posted this story before, but I think it fits here. I interviewed to be a property manager for an office complex. We did the interview with the regional director and the company's HR director. The interview took place in the office for the property manager they were to hire. About 15 minutes into the interview, the regional director's phone rang on loud. Instead of apologizing and continuing on, he answered the call. He was very loud on the phone and didn't even say anything about being in the middle of an interview. The HR director looked at me and gave me a look that was like, Sorry, he thinks he is a big deal. I looked around while he was on the phone and noticed there was a camera on the ceiling with their company logo on it that faced the property manager's desk. That was the last straw. I stood up and shook the HR director's hand and thanked him for his time. The regional director, who was still on the phone, asked me what was going on. I told him he is rude for not only answering his phone, but taking the call. No one is that important and he can go to heck. Felt good walking out of there and never regretted it at all. Story 13. Honestly, red flags you should look for. 1. If the positions they are hiring are generally entry level, but the company is hiring tenured people to fill them, it means the company has a crap training program. You're going to have a ragtag team of incompetent coworkers. 2. If the interview consists solely of, tell me about a time you, behavioral questions, just run. If a company is looking for excellence, they'll add in technical questions. See above for the reason. 3. If early on in the interview, the interviewer goes from interviewer mode to promoter role, trying to convince you to take the job even before it's offered, see number 1 for reason. 4. Honestly, this is solely my own observation and it'll sound far out there, but based on my observations, it has played out. Get there early and visit the bathrooms. You don't have to go in, just find a seating area not too far from the restrooms and observe the passerby going to and from the bathrooms. If most people are simply going in and out for number 1s, you're cool. If you notice that most folks are going in and taking forever, you're looking at a stressful workplace. Wait a minute, is that genius? That sounds genius. Or is he stupid and I'm stupid for not thinking he's stupid? Story 14. I had a weird interview years ago. I was applying to be a trade sales assistant as the job details and duties seemed to match what I was already doing at my temp job at the time. The office didn't feel like an office. It looked like only interviewers were there and a receptionist that was extremely quiet and never looked at anyone. You didn't see other workers or things going on, which I thought was strange. Red flag number 1. It didn't feel like an office, especially since I've worked in a few. They have a certain way they're set up to be appealing to clients, but also people running about busy and talking. I saw none of that. It didn't feel professional. I've worked in startups, but even they had this feeling of people working and being productive. I was in an interview with a woman, and she asked me 1 or 2 questions, then suddenly went into this huge pitch, and I couldn't understand anything she said because she was talking super fast. I picked up words like, soon you'll be a manager before you know it, and stuff like that. In my eyes, when you talk so fast about something like this, a pitch or important details, they are hoping to miss something. My mental alarm bells went off after that. I didn't hear a single thing about my role as a trade assistant. You know, the person they apparently needed for their company. Red flag. I knew that since my job description never came up once, they were not actually looking for what they claimed online. I said, thank you, and left. Within 2 hours, I got an email that I'm good for the job somehow, and I needed to come in again on Friday that week. I sent them an email saying I must decline as I was no longer interested in the position. I never heard back from them again. When I checked Glassdoor and a few other sites, I realized this company has a habit of bringing people in with these job positions on LinkedIn, but in reality, according to the claims, they were taking prospective employees on the street to do commission-only based sales, like wearing a uniform and standing outside to hand out flyers no matter what you applied for. Even if you applied as a receptionist, you had to do this. I reported them on LinkedIn right away as they were lying about these positions. So yeah, the red flags was how they seemed to be holding back info when I was there, and I had a gut feeling something was wrong, not to mention the interviewer was giving off warning signs. Story 15. Had a job interview at a game studio. Wasn't a dream job or anything, but my company was having troubles, and I was sure I was going to lose my job soon, so I started looking for work. The whole interview was conducted by their managing director, who was no developer and had no real knowledge of game design, with their lead game designer sitting there as well, but not really saying much. In all my life, I had never had a more awkward interview. The guy was actively trying to make me feel insecure, and it was clear that he was immensely pleased with himself when he managed to unsettle me. He proceeded to talk about salary and told me to name my price, but that I should know that if he has a maximum salary, and that if I asked for more, I wouldn't get the job because he does not haggle. The smug little effer then proceeded to beam at me across the desk, and you could see that he was super proud of himself. I didn't get the job, but some friends of mine ended up working there. Turns out the guy was a supreme a-hole who was also very incompetent. Who would have thought that someone who thinks the best way to lead a job interview is to bully the applicant would turn out to be a massive a-hole and a really bad boss. Story 16. A honest and fair employer will tell you upfront what the salary wages are for the position which they are advertising. A Weasley exploitative employer who hopes to take advantage of his workers will instead ask, "How much are you expecting to make for this position?" He knows that you will likely interview others, so he hopes the question will cause you to panic and ask for far less than he intended to pay you. Simply answer his question with a question. How much does this position pay? Then wait and see how he responds. If he refuses to tell you, you probably don't want to work for someone like this. Getting paid what you are worth will always be an issue at a company like that. Story 17. I worked in dentistry. Here are some red flag situations I've experienced. 1. My first job after graduating from college and getting my license, the dentist hired me, then on my first day said, "Since you're new at this, we're going to pay you at an assistant salary until you prove yourself." I'm a registered dental hygienist. 2. Dental office personnel told me that nobody took breaks or even stopped for lunch because everyone in the office decided years ago that they would rather work through lunch and get out earlier, which also never even happened. 3. Office personnel referred to patients by the cost of their treatment plan, i.e., instead of Mrs. So-and-so is coming in today, it would be that 10K treatment plan is coming in. 4. I was asked to take a Scantron-type personality test during an initial interview to see if I was a good fit for the office. This goes hand in hand with the dental offices that for some reason use Scientology principles to run the office. 5. Asked if I could do a working interview. Never agree to this. It's the dentist's way of getting free work. Meanwhile, you are unprotected as a non-employee. It's inappropriate to work on patients also that aren't your patients. 6. Arrived to an interview only to find out it was a group interview. We had to watch a 10-minute PowerPoint about the dentist, then take a quiz about his life. 7. Been interviewed by an office manager or offered a job without ever meeting a dentist. Who are you really answering to in the office? Who's responsible for the patients? I love what I do, but I've worked for some seriously shady people. Of course, the best guy I worked for had the nerve to retire. Story 18. During the interview process, try to come into contact with as many of the existing employees as possible to see how they act and how they treat you. During one interview process many years ago, the other girls I met came off as kind of whiny. Then during the interview, the boss asked me if I'm a girly girl, which I'm obviously not, and I confirmed it. She said it was a girly girl environment, so I might find it a little hard to fit in. So for me, that was a massive red flag for bickering and toxicity. Got the job, turned it down. For later job interview processes, I asked to meet a number of employees during the interview process, and this was facilitated for me. If there's nothing to hide and it's a good environment, they'll be happy to make this happen for you. I'd say it's an incredibly useful thing to do to make sure the place matches your work ethic and your values. It's all about finding the right fit. I've always said it's best to try and interview them just as much as they are to you, which is easier said than done. Because sometimes you can be so desperate for a job, you're just like, "Hey, take me on, I don't care." But let me tell you, that yielded a lot of trouble for me. Story 19. When the interviewer is actively telling you how much the job sucks. The manager of the Domino's who interviewed, she looked like she was ready to cry during the whole thing. I knew right then and there I wasn't going to be there long. She informed me during the interview that it's just like high school here, aka people were immature jerkwads and nobody was getting 30 hours because then upper management would have to give them benefits. I got the job and she quit on my second day. I hadn't even been trained and my only shifts were during the afternoon rush during the height of the pandemic. 4 of the 5 people who were there when I first started working there either quit or were let go over the course of about 3 months. My paycheck was late several times. One of our drivers was regularly allowed to sit in the back room folding boxes for an hour during the rush because he had to charge his ankle monitor. Essentially, he wasn't doing his job when we needed all the drivers we could get. And to top it all off, I got fired for getting close to 30 hours. They claimed it was because I'd had multiple warnings about my performance, even though I'd never heard any complaints or comments or anything about how well I was doing. I was on time every single day and was responsible for training everyone who came after me until I got let go. Again, some guy sat on his butt all shift and was fine, but I got let go because I kept asking for more hours. 2 out of 10 would never work at Domino's again. Oh, you're kind of shattering my illusions of Domino's right now. And quick poll in the comments, what is your favorite pizza chain? I'll admit I myself am a sucker for Papa John's. Those little peppers are great, man. Story 20. I have taught music lessons off and on for years. If you work at a studio, you teach as a contractor and are not literally an employee of the studio. However, they do get a cut in the fee because it's their studio. Previously, I just went into a studio and asked if they had space and if they had a need for a teacher in my specialty. Things got set up and that was that. I would contact potential students and we'd set up our lessons. But at this studio, I was being made to sit through 2 phone interviews before I could even start. First red flag. If I passed after all that, I still had to make a video of myself pretending to teach a lesson. All this with the studio being located maybe 15 minutes from my house. I couldn't just walk in there and meet and play tunes. No! In the second phone interview, they were asking, "What is your definition of being on time?" And "Do you have any plans to take a vacation in the coming months?" And "Do you have any gigs coming up soon?" I finally realized that instead of letting their self-employed teachers run their own schedules with students, these people were literally assigning kids to the teachers with no regard to the teacher-student compatibility, and then they were dictating the lesson, date, and time, regardless of the teacher's needs or schedule. Moral of this story is, don't ever assume that the next place you might work at is following the same rules or the same sensible, unwritten ethics as the last one. Story 21. Having a few jobs in my life, here are some. 1. Our flat rates are above the national average, usually means a better hourly but no overtime pay. 2. We make a lot from commission. If it's not an MLM or Devil Corp, it usually means a very low pay and long working hours to make a living. 3. You don't mind picking an extra shift or two. Best case, basic hourly pay. Worst, unpaid OT. 4. We're looking for a part-time that can cover some things. It means a 40-hour week with part-time pay and no benefits. 5. It's a 6-hour shift. That is specific for my country. You get a bit better flat rates than a part-time, but still, no benefits. And the one that made me run away really fast, some people may come at night to pick some stuff up. You don't have to write them down in the book or anything. It's a mob-controlled warehouse. Story 22. When I was having my interview with the hiring manager, who seemed excited about the company and the job, he brought me into the conference room, where the owner was, who, I believe, forgot there was an interview at the time and day in that room, but he stayed for the interview so he could keep watching his golf game while holding an unlit cigar in his hand. Can't remember if the sound was on and low or he just muted it. And his only question he asked was, when he heard the name of a previous company I'd worked for, was, "Oh, so did they talk about me? What'd they say? Probably not nice things." Yes, in fact, they did. No, I didn't tell him what they said. They said he makes female engineers cry, kind of pointedly, since I am both an engineer and female. He was asking as my previous company formed out of a group of people that left his company to start a competing company. Story 23. Not so subtle. I used to work as a cook at a restaurant known for their buffalo wings, which were wild. Very long story about why I quit, but a too long didn't read. They lied about starting wages. Fast forward about half a year, I moved to a new state, was looking for employment, and happened to be in the same restaurant chain getting food. Asked about a job while waiting at the bar. When I mentioned I worked for one of the busiest and newest ones, first one in its area, literally a NRO or new restaurant opening, everyone was trained in a corporate-run program. I got an immediate interview with the kitchen manager. He was interested. First major red flag. I have cooks who have been working here for 15 years. So literally zero upward mobility, which I kind of figured. Second was the biggest red flag ever. Why did you quit? So I told him honestly. How did you find out you were paid less than the other cooks? I asked them. Well, I would have fired them for that. Your pay is between you and your boss. You can't do that. And my pay is between me and anyone I wish to talk about it with. I can fire anyone for any reason I like. And not according to the National Labor Relations Act, but oh effing K, Mr. Chief. We're done here. Luckily, my go-to wings had just been brought to be because the manager became a bit angry after I said that. Story 24. Way too late to be seen, but positional descriptions often say what they do or don't want in a hire, and you can learn a lot by reading between the lines. The worst one I saw seemed like an incredible job with great benefits, but kept saying they needed a no-drama applicant with a lot of emotional resilience specifically. Probably the last person had a mental breakdown from all of the drama, so I noped the heck out. It's not even that the expectations are unreasonable, but by emphasizing it, it hints what you'll be dealing with, that they don't want to come out and say potential red flags. Experienced professionals who takes direction well. You need to have spent years learning how to do it so we can tell you the way we want it done, which will inevitably be wrong or inefficient. Minimum 6-month commitment. It's so crappy working here that we actually have to expressly stipulate this. Must have enthusiastic can-do attitude. We're going to make you do things you really shouldn't have to do, probably without any training. Competitive benefits for the right candidate. Benefits are awarded on the secret merit system that has nothing to do with you showing up, working your hours, and doing a good job. If you screw up, we'll use your benefits as leverage to scare you. Willing to go above and beyond. We're going to expect you to do whatever crap we tell you to, no matter what you were hired for, and work as much as we want you to, no matter what your schedule says. Must have a passion for X. Even though anyone who would work here already has a passion for X, we nonetheless consider working with X a huge bonus and have accordingly reduced the compensation. No drinking or drugs. That's already a law and expectation everywhere. Probably pays so crappy that they can only attract drug addicts or drives people to drink. Many jobs in my industry have on-site housing, and I'll drink in my own home if I want to. F that noise. Unpaid internship. We'll work you like a slave doing totally unskilled labor that in no way advances your career goals because we don't want the productivity of our skilled workers to drop while teaching you dumb, stupid idiots how to do crap. We'll use you up and down to get another fresh-faced, naive slave when you inevitably burn out. Competitive atmosphere. Every day is the corporate equivalent of the Thunderdome. Motivated self-starter. If you finish what we told you to do so, you'd better find something else to work on so every single second of your employment is productive. We don't want to pay anyone to tell you what to do next. Just figure it out. But if you guess wrong, you'll be chewed out for wasting time. Detail-oriented. Be able to notice absolutely everything and fix it for us. And if anything gets through, that's on you. What's your expected pay range? What a coincidence. This position pays just a hair more than the bottom of your range. What luck. Ability to multitask. We're going to give you so much work it's humanly impossible to complete during your work hours. Or we expect you to be in 3 places at once. We used to have 3 people to get all this crap done, but it's cheaper, though impossible, to have one person do everything, and that is you. Story 25. Got called for an interview at one school. Got a call an hour later for another school wanting to set up an interview. They asked me, "What time is your other interview?" As I was honest and said I had a different interview that day. "What would happen if they offered you a job?" they asked. I was flabbergasted. I had the interview at 9 at the other school. They said to come in at 8. Get there and the principal didn't know my name, that I had interned in that school and just wanted to gossip about the teachers that I taught under when I mentioned my internship. It was maybe 15 minutes long. I hated it and it was clear I wouldn't fit. I left that interview and went to the other one. The other one lasted an hour of just talking about my teaching philosophy and how much I enjoy teaching my students. Basically got the job right then and there. So far, I've enjoyed this school. I'm so happy the other one didn't work out. It was a crap school to begin with when I was an intern there. No one seemed to like their job. The school I got hired in is just down the street and so welcoming. Story 26. So I walked into a job interview once at an open space office. I realized very fast that I was the only woman in the room. It was a small company, but small enough that there would be no women present at all was weird. Towards the end of the interview, another woman walked into the space, walked up to the coffee maker and kind of announced to the room that it was a mess again, and why hasn't anyone cleaned it up, and with a huff, started organizing it. I even asked about it in the interview. They said, of course there are more women. They even got one to call me up after the interview to prove there are girls. You shouldn't have to do that. There were other red flags there, but don't work for any company that's homogenous. If you can't see any women or people of color in a big room, it speaks volumes about company culture, hiring practices, etc. At my next job, I met a woman who'd worked at that company and told me that I dodged a major bullet. She'd gotten a concussion on the job and they were trying to cheat her out of the benefits. Story 27. When no one will look at you in the eye in passing, I worked at a psych practice that I loved for the first couple of years. The doc that owned it had a terrible reputation, to the point that other practitioners would extend condolences when they heard where I worked. However, he had taught me a tremendous amount and had mentored me quite a bit. I was still anxious because he was an a-hole, but I was also able to put a lot of positive out into the community about him. I had great coworkers, both clinically and in admin. When people came to interview, I was happy to fully endorse the practice. But things couldn't last forever. The practice was experiencing financial difficulties. We were top-heavy with support staff and it actually cost a lot to work there. People left. The new ones wanted to stage a coup. Divorces, drama, layoffs, oh my. And the boss was a literal terror. The last year and a half, I avoided anyone that was interviewing. I couldn't look them in the eye. Once, when we hosted a lunch for a doc that was interviewing, I laughed at an inopportune or inappropriate moment. All this to say, watch for body language. Sometimes it tells you more than the verbal. Story 28. I interviewed to work in the parts department of an auto dealership once. The guy was trying to be subtle, but he kept asking how sensitive I was or if I could take a joke. I assured him I was the daughter of a diesel mechanic and grew up around truck drivers, so I knew what he meant. At one point, he even said, "I wouldn't want my daughters working here." I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was 19 and that was part of the culture. Then, girls who could take a joke, i.e. not call guys out on their misogynistic bullcrap, were more fun to be around. I didn't get the job. I was upset about it until I found out one of my family members had worked there and hated it. Absolutely hated it. She asked if I'd seen the movie North Country with Charlize Theron. When I said yes, she said, "Yeah, I wish it could have been that nice." Story 29. Any sort of reference to working out of hours because they're a team player focused company who go the extra mile, or any bullcrap corpos speak to justify underpaying you. Being late to the interview is the next red flag. There's no excuse for that. It clearly shows they don't care about their hires and or a badly organized company. Ludicrous psychoanalysis questions next. I got asked, if you were a brick in a building, which one would you be and why? And name 5 people from history you'd invite to dinner and why. Go! Meaningless drivel that tells neither side anything about the work or company. More than 2/3 of interviews, plus questions being repeated in each one. As a final, more flexible point, any reluctance to be flexible with hours. I loathe companies that care more about how busy their office looks than actually how much work is being done. Immediate unwillingness to be flexible indicates this kind of environment. This one depends on the job, of course, but showing total inflexibility is a big red flag to me. It makes me think they consider you a number rather than a human being. Story 30. I'm always wary of companies that are very eager to tell you all about them. Like, why are you trying to sell this company to me? I recently had an extensive interview process for a startup. Honestly, I stuck with out of morbid curiosity. All the interviews were remote, due to COVID, so it really wasn't a hard ship to conference call. I had 1 telephone interview, one-on-one interview, and then 2 panel interviews. Until the final interview, the only things anyone would tell me about the company was who was backing them, like Google or Amazon CEOs, and money was coming from Bezos and other big names you'd recognize. I Googled the company, and honestly, nothing seemed dodgy. I still don't think anything is untoward about it as such. But it was clear they were less interested in your skills and expertise and more in your willingness to blindly devote yourself to the cause. All the people I spoke to had already drunk the Kool-Aid. My skills seemed lacking for the position they were interviewing, for although they did explain they were mostly interested in me for a specific area I operate in, that they needed to set up a new department. All of them were way too enthusiastic about the company and kept name-dropping the big names mentioned before, like I was supposed to go, "Oh my gosh, really?" and drop my knickers. My follow-up interview after being declined was, "Your CV is awesome. Your answers were all great and everyone loved speaking to you and felt you had the right knowledge and attitude, but you just didn't seem invested in the company enough." I replied it was hard to be invested in a company where I had been told nothing about it, except who was fronting the money, and also a place I did not yet work at, and she said bye and just hung up, which really just confirmed to me they couldn't care less about being qualified to do the job, as long as you were suitably impressed by their CEOs and were prepared to blindly and passionately chuck your entire life in with them to the bitter end. I've been told that's not uncommon with startups and new companies these days. They want people who believe in them more than experience and knowledge to ensure no one jumps ship if it gets a little rough. But personally, major bullet dodged. I like my job now, and I'll give you a fair amount of my time and energy, but it is just a job at the end of the day. Story 31. I'm in HR, and this is something I do on interviews. Get a window seat if you can. Look at everyone you see in the environment. Look at how employees carry themselves, how they interact with each other. Are their heads up? Everyone you meet in the interview will be a different version of themselves for the most part, good or bad. Interviewers are nervous too, so sometimes flags may not be flags at all. I even give this advice to people that interview at my company. One time I had to get to work late, so I did not meet a person I recruited yet who was interviewing that day, and a colleague covered for me. I spoke to him the next day to see how everything went, and he said he took my advice and saw two people high-five randomly. It was me and the head of organic chemistry. He just had some great data coming back. It's not important. I was not even aware that he was still there. But that is exactly how our workplace is every day. Interviewing is kind of like dating. Don't pay attention to how someone treats you on the first date. Pay attention to how they treat everyone else. That is how you find out who they really are. Sorry if this reply was longer than I planned, but hopefully the insight helps. Story 32. I went in for a mass hiring event at a warehouse or factory of some kind. I was wearing a hoodie, and you're not allowed to have your hood up on the floor, which I didn't know because I'd never worked in that kind of job before. So the boss is yelling after me, "Ma'am, ma'am!" But I'm paying no attention because I'm not a ma'am, just short and my hair used to be long. And it doesn't register that he's talking to me. So he jogs over, yanks me by the hood, and drags me bodily back over the line. I turn to him like, "What the F?" And he's all red-faced and sweaty and furious while he chews me out for wearing my hood up. I told him, "Hey, I'm not a girl," and then left immediately. I didn't want to work with a guy who would treat a woman like that. So, I feel like the manager physically attacking you might not be the most subtle red flag, actually. Story 33. I see a lot of comments about people being tired while working, and I've come to realize the most of these jobs are for office positions or sales positions. If I may, give an oil field or energy sector example. I had gone through an interview for the position of hydrovac swamper for a company. In the interview, I had asked what kind of pay I would be making. The interviewer had stated, "Minimum wage, and we won't be paying living allowance until you prove you're worth it." I stood up and walked out of the room and told him to have a nice day. Now I swamp for over double that a day with a smaller company that treats me like family. If someone tells you that they won't pay you living allowance when you're working anywhere past an hour away from your home, walk away. Legally, they need to pay for your living allowance unless you run a camp, at least in Canada. I actually don't know about the US. Story 34. My friend applied for and got the executive chef position at a hotel that we both worked at as cooks over 15 years prior. When the executive sous chef, second in charge of the kitchen, position came open, he called and recruited me. Being an upper-level, salaried position, I had to interview director of food and beverage and the GM of the hotel. They asked about work ethic and what else I could bring to the table. I spoke about how it was my goal to reopen their rooftop restaurant and patio that had been abandoned for 10 years, and that with my experience in the downtown bar and music scene, I was confident that we, my friend and I, could restore the hotel to its former glory and profits. The GM said, "I would love to see that happen, but what if we didn't move forward on that? Would you still come work with us?" I said, "Sure, I just feel like it is a huge waste to not utilize the best and tallest deck in town." The director then chimed in and explained, "We would really like it if you would spend most of your time handling the line, so that the chef could focus on the banquets and other items." I knew what that meant. They wanted to hire a grunt on salary that they could milk rather than paying for 2 union cooks that would make hourly. I was offered the job but turned it down in order to spend more time with my dying dog, Cancer. A few months later, they had an opening for a bar manager that was underpaid but hourly. I took that spot and turned the place around, as much as I could while getting pushback from apathetic superiors who were happy to collect easy checks rather than driving business. I worked my butt off, let me tell you, taking on duties, projects from 4 different departments and clocked overtime every day, usually 1 to 2, but pulled a couple of 16-plus hour shifts. When my friend was tired of the hotel's corporate BS and got another job, they knew I would be walking out the door too. They fired me on my buddy's second to last day, and I was ecstatic through the termination meeting. Working there was frustrating, but I stacked a lot of dough, and it helped me power through the depression of losing my dog. It sucked, I knew it would, and I would probably do it again. It wasn't all bad for someone who likes to fix things, I guess. Story 35. I got a job in a grocery store. They told me after I got the job that I would be training in another city? Okay, weird, but alright. I trained for 2 weeks in this other city before going back to the store in the city I interviewed in and live in. When I started the job, I asked my supervisor why I trained in another city. They said, "We didn't want you to pick up the bad habits of this store." Uh-oh. People left for hours at a time, like literally 4-hour lunches, and sometimes wouldn't come back for the rest of the day. I remember one day in particular, everyone left me there, like my second week, with a huge line. People were asking me for their order, and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm new, I have no idea what that is or how to give it to you. I worked there for a few months and got the hang of it, but I couldn't take the leaving for hours at a time. It got me over the hump, but I eventually quit. Story 36. My red flags where you can't ask questions or legitimate questions aren't answered. Being evasive. My latest job, when I asked how they were handling figures and things a lot, was pen and paper. This is for a small local charity, not run to its best potential, but it's certainly getting there. But they admitted that shortcoming and were very open to ideas and suggestions. Now I've been on some interviews and asked similar questions and questions about training, and it was all, "Oh, we won't discuss this now." Disorganization. I hate group interviews where it's not handled right. I turned down further interviews for a company, telling them that I couldn't imagine working for a company this disorganized. They went bankrupt the next year. Story 37. While waiting for a job interview, I heard the manager interviewing someone else through their walls. The person was having doubts, and the manager was convincing them of the opportunity and benefits. He apparently didn't know I'd been waiting, and he came out and yelled, "Whew! Closed them!" to the receptionist right in front of me. He then saw me and went back to the office. The receptionist then said to me that he was just really excited because they had been talking with the applicant for a while, and then hurried into his office. I walked out while she was gone. You're there to impress the manager. If they sound like they're trying to impress you, then it's likely a scam. After a lot of digging, I found out it was an MLM. They're hard to spot sometimes because when a salesperson scams enough people to build their own team, they set it up under a new company name and flood Glassdoor and other employment review sites with what presumably are fake paid reviews. If you can look up articles or books about sales techniques and you realize the interview is using them, get out. I kind of experienced something in that similar area as well, except I didn't know how to recognize, and honestly still don't, an MLM. The wool was pulled completely over my eyes until for some reason the guy panicked and he started being very adamant that this isn't an MLM, by the way. I don't know if you were thinking that before, but I swear this isn't an MLM. And I was like, oh, maybe I should look into this. And it turned out to be an MLM. Story 38. 1. Drug tests. Unless you're a pilot or law enforcement officer or jobs like those, they have no business doing these. 2. Agile practices. If you're in IT. Useless time sinks that companies picked up as a dogma sometime about 10 years ago. Expect to sit in meetings most of your day instead of getting things done. 3. We're family. They'll toss your butt the second they're done with you. Doesn't matter how much time you put in or things you've done above and beyond. But when it comes for you to get compensated, in return, they'll likely just give you the finger. Oh, you worked 60 hours last week? You can go home an hour early today. Like, no, mother effer, I want 3 days off. 4. Calling you in on weekends or doing overtime when your salary without proper documented compensation. You're paid to work 9 to 5, 40-hour weeks. You should never, ever agree to doing more unless you get something for it. Bonuses, extra time off, etc. Story 39. When they're more interested in making you tell them how you'd benefit their company, rather than genuinely trying to get to know you or your strengths, and deciding amongst themselves whether you're a good fit. My current company is really good about it, and they don't play games. Either you fit into the culture or you don't. As a result, we have the most laid-back yet ambitious and smart people here. My previous company was full of egotistical maniacs who knew how to hide it well. I asked my CEO how we managed to never have drama or issues aside from the inevitable industry issues, and he said it because he's careful not to hire divas. Seriously, it's one of the most mindful companies I've ever been at, and I wake up every day super happy with my team, manager, coworkers, etc., even when the work is whatever. Story 40. A few fair questions that can tell you a lot about the position as far as red flags is, how would you describe the culture of this company? If they stumble through the answer, red flag. What is expected of a person doing this job? If the answer is ambiguous at all, or if the answer is very long, use it to negotiate for more money. Is this role filled more often by males or females? If there is a preference either way, red flag. How many lost time accidents have you had in the last year? Are breaks paid or do I need to clock out? Why are you offering to pay only 60% of the standard wage for this position? What is the mean temperature inside in the summertime? When was your last sexual harassment training for the company? Why does your absence policy sound like the code of the Hammurabi? How many people have retired in the last blank years? Story 41. I have a bit of a story about a very intense job interview I had which threw up a lot of red flags, though it is a little long, so skip here if you are uninterested. I was looking for a postdoc in bioinformatics a while back and got a lead from a friend that a research team in their university had such a position open. I got in touch with the professor, and she got back to me very promptly, asking for a chat that day. Slightly bemused, since it was probably 1 hour from being told about the position to being in what was effectively a first stage interview, I had a decent long chat with her about the position. The bizarre thing was that she spent a lot of time impressing on me how intense her team was. She painted a picture of a collection of genius ex-maths Olympiad-type mathematicians and physicists. So she didn't know if I would fit in, since although my PhD was in bioinformatics, my background was biology, rather than computer science, math, or physics. A fair criticism, though her blunt delivery left me feeling somewhat demeaned. She then went on to tell me that I had not published enough, and she would expect someone in my position to have published more papers. This took me aback slightly, since the number of publications a researcher has produced is a very poor metric by which to judge research performance. I had looked at our team's publications and seen that she was correct. They had each had a decent number of papers, some very nice ones. However, I also noticed they were mostly on large papers, often preprints, and where they were fifth or sixth author, whereas all mine have been first author and well cited. Looking at H-index, I compared favorably to the majority of them. She also said, quote, "I am talking to you now, and I'm not sure you are crazy enough for the team," which was another strange comment that I tried my best to make a joke out of. Despite some slightly odd moments, however, she was very nice, and I was still interested in working with her team. She then asked me if I could make a remote presentation about my research to her team, which was about 25 strong, for 9 a.m. the next morning. It was about 5 p.m. at this point. Stomach doing barrel rolls, I said yes, realizing I was going to be up all night preparing for this. As if to make things better, she said, "Go into intense detail about the technical and mathematical aspects of your work. Since my team likes that, don't hold back. They will ask some very hard questions." Now, I suspect she may have thought that because I have a biology background, which often means relatively weak at math, I'd probably just do some pre-packaged bioinformatics using out-of-the-box software, and maybe had some rudimentary scripting experience, and therefore asking me to go into intense technical detail on my own PhD would be perfectly safe for her team, despite having very different backgrounds. What she did not know, however, is that I have a passion for the more abstract and mathematical side of bioinformatics, which I took to rather well. So I gave a 40-minute lecture to her research team, going into meticulous detail about the algorithms and statistical methodologies I had developed, which, although I tried to make it as interesting as possible, must have been pretty brutal for them, to be honest. Hey, she asked for it. They asked me 2 easy questions, and then we finished the call. I honestly got fantastic vibes from her team. They seemed like wonderful and passionate people. She had offered me a funded position by the end of the day, doing whatever research I wanted to pursue. I was extremely excited, but also there were some big red flags there. At every moment, right up until the presentation, I got the impression that she was implying that I was not good enough to be in her team. And this, coupled with the intensity of the interview process, made me feel very apprehensive about accepting the offer. In the end, I was offered a more senior position in an amazing research team in my home country, which I was part of an extremely exciting project, so I had to turn her kind offer down. It was definitely a valuable experience and went from massively inflaming my imposter syndrome, a rather unfair thing to do to an early career scientist in honesty, to almost entirely dousing it. It gave me much more confidence in my ability, so for that I owe her my gratitude for the trial by fire. But my goodness, there were some red flags there. Sorry about the length of this, I just felt like it was all relevant. Story 42. I was asked for salary expectations in an email. I gave a researched and very reasonable range. Was asked again in the first interview. I answered the same range. Was asked again in the second interview. I answered the same range. They called to tell me I was the top candidate, but couldn't move forward with the final interview unless I could go way down on my salary expectations. And they needed me to agree to the number right then and there without even offering the job to me. After polite back and forth, I let her know that I knew what I needed salary-wise in my next role, but they were offering what was the same as I was making, but also for only a limited term contract. So I gave my apologies, but I didn't think it would be a good fit. I said thank you and all the best. The hiring manager immediately changed her tone, harshly telling me that it's a good thing my true colors came out now because we are looking for someone who isn't only motivated by finances, and that you should take this as a lesson for future job interviews, not to be so focused on money. On top of all the other glaring issues with this experience, I'm a youngish woman early on in my career, and I feel confident I wouldn't have gotten that lecture if I had been older or a man. I'd never negotiated before, ever, for anything, and it freaked me out a lot for the future, but it definitely gave me a window into how I would be treated if I worked for these people. Story 43. I showed up to an interview and checked in at the front. I sat in the lobby and waited for almost an hour. I figured they were running behind. Eventually, a different receptionist came up to me and asked if anyone had been with me, and I told her no, and that I was there for an interview. She asked with who, and I told her the person scheduling the interview didn't tell me their name, but to just show up to the main building. They spent probably 10 minutes making calls trying to find out where I needed to go. They found out that the interview was not in the main building, but in a separate building outside the main building and behind it. Now, how would I have known that was where I needed to go? By that point, I was an hour late for my interview, and the guy just seemed uninterested. I didn't end up getting the position I interviewed for, but they called me back for a different job interview. I worked there for almost 5 years, and it did indeed suck. Story 44. From my experience, just doing research on the company helps a lot. I have turned down a few offers and secondary interviews because I knew what the answers were before I asked my follow-up questions in the interview process. One of my personal examples is below. I was looking at a position with a local healthcare company, mainly in a hospital setting. I hit up Glassdoor, LinkedIn, and even on my Facebook asking if anyone worked for said company. I found a few people and asked them some questions about culture, and it seemed a good fit. I applied, and in a short time later, I received an interview with this company. The individuals who were interviewing me nailed all the questions I asked of them up until one. I specifically asked about on-call in IT. I expect to work well more than 40 hours every week. 40 hours is a light week. I knew going into the interview it had a very unique rotation. You would work one on-call day a week, and that day kept advancing every week until you have a week or two off, i.e. week 1 was a Monday, week 2 is a Tuesday, etc. until you completed all 7 days, then you were off until it was your Monday again. The staff I talked to said it was this way because on-call was non-stop every day and people could not possibly do a full week. I asked this question of the people interviewing me and got the same information. I also asked why it was set up this way. This is where I knew the place was not for me. The individuals informed me they were not sure. On-call is not really used, and it was a way to not steal a whole week waiting for calls. The interview works both ways. Just do some footwork and ask questions you already know the answers to. I won't falsely answer questions in an interview, and would never work for a company that misleads me before ever even making an offer. Story 45. I'll be surprised if anyone sees this, but here we go. I was at a job interview, and it was going really well, and I was told that yes, there was some sales, but it wasn't anything major like door-to-door selling. Then they said they would call me if they thought I was a good fit. I said sure, okay. I got a call soon after and was told to bring comfortable shoes because I would be shadowing for this second part of the job, and I'd be doing a lot of walking around that day. So I arrive in my best suit and comfortable but good-looking shoes, and I'm immediately told that I'll be going with this dude door to door to sell their product, a major business phone company. I had absolutely nothing else to do and thought, F it. So I went for the experience. The dude I was with catcalled some woman, and I was like, dude, they don't like that. And he responded, yeah, they do. He also admitted to me that he was basically committing insurance fraud because his car was still registered in New York City, and this was near Boston, and he lived here for about a year or so. I had just come from a job selling insurance and I hated it. He also had an obviously broken nose because he refused to wear a seatbelt, even though he got into an accident a bit ago and broke his nose on his steering wheel because, well, he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. The cool part of the job was while he was doing technical help at a pizza shop, the guy gave us free slices each. However, this guy also went to places that said no soliciting. He bought me lunch and said he thought I was a good fit because even though I was creeped the F out, I was very personable. I politely declined, stating I was specifically told I would not be doing door to door, and he said, yeah, the secretary makes that mistake a lot. I internally called BS and knew that if this place would lie to me, I would be expected to lie to my customer. F salesman. Story 46. I once had a phone interview lined up after the first 2 phone interviews. This was pre-COVID and the business was local, so I thought it was odd that I would have 3 phone interviews, specifically because I was interviewing with the department head, but I went along with it. I spent a week preparing, got a little anxiety as you do, and really wanted to nail this interview. I was told they would call me at 10 a.m. I made arrangements to take off the morning from my current job and had someone watch my kids. 10 a.m. came. 10:15 also came. 10:30. And by 11, I called the administrator that set the interview and asked what happened. Perhaps I got the time and or day mixed up. which I didn't. I wrote it down when she told me and repeated it twice. However, the mix-up was that the department head was told it was an in-person interview. They never rescheduled the interview, and I later got a notice that the position had been filled. You use your best judgment on that one. Another time, same company, posted a position for their downtown location. I applied, was called in for a phone interview that was passed on for an in-person interview. I made sure it was in person and lined everything up again, prepared hard again, drove all the way downtown on the morning of. Upon arriving, I had to announce myself, and they called the hiring manager I would be meeting with. He was extremely nice, pleasant, and we spoke for the full hour. I got really good vibes, we connected well, and I thought I had it in the bag. He then said something to the effect of, I am surprised they set this interview here with us. You see, the role is for the position in Kentucky. I'm in New York. And you would be leading the Midwest sales division. You don't want to move to Kentucky, do you? In my head, I said, what the F? He apologized and said that since this is their westernmost office, this is the office they listed on the job posting. I wasted a ton of time yet again. I had all given up on that company and quit applying for positions. However, your resume and information stay in their system for a while. About 6 months later, I get a call from a nice girl in HR to ask if I would be interested in applying for a new role that just opened up. I asked her to forward on the role information, and if interested, I would apply through the link. Well, when I got the email for this role, it was for a temporary internship with their customer service department. I called the nice HR girl back and asked if she had the right resume. I had 15 years of experience, 10 years in management, a master's degree, and quite a number of certifications for my career. I had it with that company, and I let the nice HR girl know I was not pleased with this call and the recommendation for this role in a not-so-nice way. I wish I could go back and apologize, but I had been not having good luck finding a new role for quite some time, and this was the last straw. Specifically with this same company, which I was having bad luck with all along. In the end, I like to think things happen for a reason, and I think the reason things didn't work out, well, for a while, was so that I can land my current role. I was able to move out of the department. I was into a new position, which since I've been promoted. I absolutely like a lot what I do, and the people are really great. So I suppose that was the reason things didn't work out. Story 47. I interviewed for a federal prosecutor gig a few years ago. I was asked what my view on Brady is. This is a rule related to how you must hand over evidence that helps prove a man's innocence no matter what. Except they asked, well, there is a Supreme Court's view of Brady, and then there are personal interpretations. What is yours that you'd follow? When I expressed surprise and asked what the interviewer was talking about, I was told that several witnesses were killed in their investigations because their identities were disclosed as part of such Brady evidence handover, implying that their expectation was that I would not hand over all information that may result in a man's innocence because witnesses may be insufficiently protected by the people paid to protect them. My response was, I hand over everything under Brady, to the point where if I think it even might be Brady evidence, I will hand it over anyway. And if I so much as suspected another colleague was doing anything less, I'll blow the effing whistle so loud they'll hear it over in Maryland. They were horrified. Never got called back for a second-round interview, despite my being overqualified for the position. Funny thing is, it turns out they could have used my approach, given how this administration panned out. Lots of people from the same office were before Congress at hearings in the years that followed as whistleblowers. I've never been as ashamed of this country as I was the day I walked over to my car after that interview. I just came home, told my wife I hadn't got the job, and it still upsets me. I'd wanted to be a federal prosecutor my whole life, except not like that. And I won't work for a group of prosecutors. Ever. Story 48. Excessive use of terms like multiple hats or multitasking, self-starting, or hitting the ground running are signs that you will be expected to do jobs which should be performed by two experienced people for half the pay which they would need to pay either, with no training whatsoever and ineffective, inattentive management or mentoring. If the interviewer implies that current employees are not that great, run. That's a sign that they think they can hire new people with less work experience to replace the existing staff. Some managers think that sort of thing because they are poorly managing the company or driving out good employees with understaffing skinflintery. That's usually a good sign of business in a death spiral. If they have a very low expectation or the business seems like it is overly bureaucratic or isn't going anywhere very fast, it's also a very bad sign. Story 49. I once went to an interview and saw so many red flags it was baffling. 1. The interviewers kept me waiting for 30 minutes. In that time, I noticed a ton of religious propaganda all over the place. I am not religious and I knew this place might be tedious for me to work. 2. They walked me through the floor to meet employees and see the workstations. Several employees were very clearly sick but at work. The hiring manager even addressed it by stating they have a very strict attendance requirement and need a 24-hour notice for time off. Who knows 24 hours before they fall ill? 3. While on the floor, I noticed a scoreboard of all the required metrics, and basically no one was meeting them. 4. At the very end, after offering me the job, they sat me down and asked me to sign a document that stated if I left in the first 6 months, I would have to pay back my first 3 months in pay. They said it was their way of discouraging fast turnover. I noped out of there oh so quickly. Story 50. You should do these extra things. It'll give you experience for the future. Yeah, no. You pay me for a certain job and that's the job I'll do unless I get a raise. I'm not falling for you trying to get me to do more work for the same pay. This happened to me at Subway. I was a normal sandwich artist, yet the manager wanted me to also start doing inventory and ordering new stuff. Heck no, that's a manager's job, your job. Yet I don't get your salary in return, so find someone else or do your own dang job. I also once voiced my concerns about him barely ever being at the restaurant I worked at, him usually being at the other 3 he managed. And he told me, well, I have a ton to do, you know, all the paperwork and phone calls and such. What do you want? You want to switch? So I told him, sure, I'll switch with you. I won't do a good job, and the restaurant will go bankrupt in a month or 2. As I don't know a thing about managing a place like this, but I'd rather have your job and pay than the crappy job and pay you give me. He didn't have a retort to that. Also, as usually mentioned in threads like this, we're a family. Yeah, no we aren't. Sure, colleagues can become like family naturally if they get along, but if the boss tells you you are, that's a clear indicator of, I want you to sacrifice yourself and your free time for the company for no extra pay if possible. Story 51. Don't know if this counts or not, but every place I interview, I check the bathroom. I was interviewing at an office in Midtown Manhattan for a Chinese company, and it was going well. We took a break, and I went to the bathroom, and it was a disaster. There was newspaper and toilet paper everywhere. The bathroom has no paper towel, which forced me to use toilet paper from a disgusting stall, explaining the paper everywhere. There was only a small wastebasket for paper, and it was overflowing, and this was Tuesday. Before returning to the interview meeting, I popped down a hallway and asked an admin where I could get coffee or a snack. She, not knowing I was interviewing, she said there were no such things here and you had to bring your own, but leaving for coffee midday was frowned upon. I returned to the interview and crushed it, and then politely turned it down the week later when it was offered. Just like when you run the shower when you look at buying a home, check the bathroom and amenities of the workplace when you get there. Aside, there were no decorations on the walls in the main spaces, only those inspirational sayings, pictures everywhere, and everyone's desk looked like a bomb went off. Story 52. About a year ago, I was interviewing at a medical office that specializes in a particular service. I also live in a college town that is on the smaller side, about 140K population, and while I'm not well known, the family of lawyers I married into is practically a regional institution. They're good at what they do, but being related to them is unpleasant for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that they expect all family members, even those of us not in the firm, to still put the firm first. Informally, I go by my maiden name to separate myself from being associated with them, and don't advertise the connection, even when people ask me for recommendations about legal needs. Anyway, I did well in the interviews, and it seemed like a good fit, until I mentioned something about my husband being an attorney. The office manager's eyes lit up as she asked, wait, are you part of that family? Since lying in an interview about something that can be so easily fact-checked isn't a good look, I had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. She went on to rave about how much money my in-laws generate for the medical office, totally oblivious to how uncomfortable I was growing by the minute. I have a pretty good poker face, so I don't falter for that, but I was also really taken aback that the conversation abandoned all pretext of being professional and it turned into a game of 20 questions, such as, so what are they really like? I knew as soon as I got in my car to leave that there was no way I'd be accepting the job. I understand people being curious about a small town celebrity, but I just had the distinct impression that I'd gotten a taste of what working there would be like. No boundaries between my job, my personal life, and the in-laws firm. My instincts were right on the money, as later that same day, some staffer from the firm called the medical office to make a referral, and the manager told them that I'd been hired and they were looking forward to having a liaison, or something to that effect. This was before any formal job offer had been extended to me, by the way. Story 53. After several years of experience, I got hired as a wrecker operator at a salvage yard. I was interviewed and hired by the wife of the owner. He was spending several years as a guest of the state somewhere of the company. First day on the job, she walks me up to this Charlie Brown looking character. This is Archie. He runs the towing department. And she disappears. He does the usual small talk, and I ask, so who did you tow for before here? No one. I don't know anything about towing. They hired me because in 2 years I'll have a business degree. Dear Lord save me. He sort of stayed out of the way. I did have to explain to him more than once why a sling truck couldn't tow a car with no wheels on it. The kicker was when his car died when he was at the downtown courthouse. He'd never been in a neighborhood like that, and granted it can be a bit unfriendly down there. He gets a cab back to the yard, jumps in one of our wreckers, and runs off to tow his car back. An hour or so later, I drop my last crush job off, and I'm just about to punch out when he's on the phone in tears. He can't tow his car. I fight rush hour traffic in the worst section of highway. I get to a lot where people are not happy to have one wrecker, let alone two, blocking the aisles. I nearly put a J-hook in his neck. His car? A 1970 Chevy Nova. You can literally throw a chain under an old GM like that, yoink back, and if the hook catches, go. Easiest cars in the world, after Volkswagen Rabbits, to hook. Took me a minute. The only good thing about that incident was 3 hours overtime. And when we got there at the yard, I told him he was buying me a beer or 3. Normally didn't drink during the week. Go to my favorite bar. Yes, where everybody knows your name. Owner's there and yelling, Keith, I've been calling you to your house, and Jeff's, another regular, trying to find you. I sold the bar. Tonight's the last night. My boss had a beer, then split. I told him I may be late the next day. An hour later, the last non-regular left. Dude locked the bar, took the cash drawer and said he'd sold the bar, not the alcohol, drink up. Then he went out and blew at least $100 on takeout. I was only an hour late the next day, but what a hangover. I didn't see a lot of interview red flags here. Just a story about a wicked guy trying to tow his car. Well, hope you got something out of that. Onward! Story 54. Getting in late, and don't know if this was already mentioned, but the quality of creature comforts at a white-collar job might be indicative of how they treat employees or value the work environment, particularly if the environment or company has been well known for perks and previously known for good treatment of employees. For example, if they have a very mediocre or non-existent cafeteria or snack bar, or if it appears it's severely understocked or filled with vending machines, if you visit the restroom before the interview and realize toiletries, soap, or any goodies that they might have had before haven't been refilled or restocked, or are of poor quality, rough and ready brand toilet paper, and prison quality hand soap, or that fixtures are broken and it doesn't look like the restrooms are thoroughly cleaned very often. These things may be indicative of poor company performance, or upper management cost cutting in order to either float the company or increase their own bonuses and stock price. Consequently, such things are the first to go, and it would be observable. Excuse yourself to go to the bathroom before the interview, or take a little look around and examine for yourself. Story 55. I had to chase up HR for my first contract. The lady replied, "You want to sign it?" Should have been the big red flag. First day at work, team leader took me around the building. In the lift, another team's leader asked, how long do I plan to stay? End of first week at work. Team leader asked if I would come back next week. I'm almost at my 3rd year at this job. People are nice. Senior management has no clue what is going on and is mostly in a different reality. First year there, one entire team had 90% plus people leave. Second year, another team had a similar situation. Everyone is just sick of management. Also, one time I had to chase HR why I haven't received my pay. Had to ask my team leader to contact management, and they in turn ask HR why an existing staff hasn't received pay. Story 56. I once interviewed for a tech startup engineering role, whose sole founder was non-technical. During the session with him, he expressed he had struggled early on to find engineer employees because, admittedly, the industry pays really well, so he had to offshore, and he was clearly still salty about it. He said that now that his business was successful, he could pay engineers more than other companies, and they would all come work to him since all engineers care about is money. The guy expressed himself in such an entitled way in a, now that I'm successful, I can be an a-hole. kind of way. When I toured the company, the engineering team was the only one in a separate windowless room, while everyone else was in the same gorgeous open space. The VP engineering was a guy hired from boot camp with no experience, although he was a really nice guy. They made a very good offer by email 10 minutes after I was out. I turned it down right away, and they were genuinely surprised, saying they would pay me more than anyone else I find. I explained to them that I wasn't all about money, and actually explained in depth what I saw that was clearly wrong, but they were still dumbfounded that my sole focus wasn't money. Yikes. Story 57. First, you should always ask about the job and the company during your interview. You're not just there begging for a job, it's a two-way street. That being said, here are some of the questions I ask and some answers that let me know the job was crap. What's the work-life balance like at insert company here? We work hard, but we play hard too. This is a canned response that means you're going to be working 60 plus hours a week, but there's beer in the mini fridge available to you never because you're working so much. How do you like working at insert company here? With some nervous chuckling and silence for a few seconds. Yeah, it's good, I guess. If they become awkward when they say they like working there, they don't. What's the culture like at insert company here? We're like a family here at X. They're gonna guilt you into a lot of overtime because we're family. But forget about a raise. Family doesn't help you out just because of the money, right? Why is the position open? How long has it been open for? Cue 5 minutes of the interviewer bickering about the last guy. You will be the last guy when this position is open again in 3 months. And lastly, if the interviewer is dismissive towards any of your questions or you don't get to ask any at all, get the heck out of there. Oftentimes you're going to be working with or for those people. If they come off as a-holes during the interview, you're going to be working next to said a-hole the entire time you're at the company. I think especially if they come off as a-holes while they're trying to put on their best face, then yeah, you're probably in danger. Story 58. These are all years old experiences. Amazon built a new warehouse in my city. The interview was a group process of about 40 people at a time, including a mouth swab. Even after backing out, I received emails asking me to come take a position at the warehouse for months. No thanks, I will not be a dehumanized cog. The Comcast interview was over for me when I asked if being a cable installer would lead to any useful certifications. No, only in-house certification and training. Well, now that I work as an electrician, let me tell you, their installs suck butt cheeks. I was fortunate enough to have landed other jobs by the time Target called me back, but 3 times I was invited to an interview. It wasn't the call that put me off, it was the digital application process. I can remember one of the questions perfectly. What percentage of politicians lie all the time? 50%, 75%, 90%, or 100%? I don't care what the F they were trying to determine, that was an inappropriate and irrelevant question. It was present each of the 3 times I applied over the course of my 20s. Heck no, I don't want to work at a soulless place that plays mind games. In all of these cases, I ended up much happier at jobs with small businesses, including my current gig as an electrician. Always trust your gut. Story 59. Do they want someone with rock star attitude? That means everyone is lazy and others pick up the slack while management does nothing. Does the job have unlimited income potential? You're selling something stupid with greater and greater pressure for performance. We're like a big family here means that their corporate culture is crap and they're trying to manipulate you. In need of an independent self-starter means the training sucks or is non-existent and there's little support from management. If they're supposedly offering over $40K for a customer service phone position, the entire thing is crap. Also, looking for those managers in training means it's a cutthroat environment where everyone plays court politics and stabs each other in the back. Dude, the amount of "we're family" we're hearing in this thread sounds like everyone's interviewing with Dominic Toretto. Story 60. Working for a therapy company. The initial interview with HR and interview with the director were within a few minutes of each other. No notice, but thought they were just really interested. But no, just high turnover. Then HR contacted me every day after about getting my references confirmed through their website. Would not tell me productivity requirements. In therapy, you're supposed to maintain a certain percentage of productivity, i.e. number of patients and treatment time and time in facility. Once started, multiple therapists had ongoing HR complaints that were either ignored or waved off. Patients were often left unattended all day except by the nurse, giving medication or therapist coming to get them, unethical practices with keeping an accurate medical record, etc. More obvious red flags once I started and made me get out ASAP. Then they tried telling me I was not allowed to leave and I absolutely had to put in a 2 weeks. I was not risking my license any further. They were crazy pants. Story 61. If an interviewer doesn't give you much of an idea of what the job entails, red flag number 1. If you know the job description and the average pay for that job and they try to cut it down significantly, red flag number 2. Ask them what turnover or attrition percentage they have. If it's high, or if they don't even know, red flag number 3. If they will not disclose where the job site is, red flag number 4. If the job is in a really bad part of town, red flag number 5. If the company is hiring en masse, red flag 6. Should you happen to have the chance of physically walking around the job site, do employees seem stressed? Do they seem to be very quiet and not social at all? Are things unkempt? If so, then red flag 7. Following reasons to absolutely not take the job. If you have the opportunity to hear how a manager speaks about their employees and you see they have negative things to say. If an employee strikes up a conversation with you and says it's a bad place, kind of obvious, I know. If there are any unnecessary emotional tactics or pressure tactics, assuming non-law enforcement or military type work. Example. 1. So you got a degree in whatever. That seems kind of a silly choice. 2. I don't think you're really cut out for this job, and I don't see how your skills match our needs. Tell me why you think we should hire you. 3. The manager or interviewing person laughs at your resume or experience or lack of experience. The list goes on and on and on, of course. Story 62. This is hardly subtle, but in the worst work environment I've ever had, things got to a point where staff departure was a serious problem. Everyone who was eligible for or even close to retirement put in their notice. Those who had professional connections elsewhere used them to find jobs in other areas and relocate, and some just left the field entirely. At the same time we were losing people right and left, it became harder and harder to replace them because most of the positions were in the skilled trade where the most efficient recruitment was via word of mouth and current employees' social networks. But nobody wanted to advise their friends and former colleagues to apply for any of the jobs we had open and uproot their lives to come work in a toxic environment. Things reached a new low point when the management issued orders that, with the exception of the hiring team, current employees were not allowed to talk to prospective recruits. After several prospects turned down the job based on what they had learned by talking to the people who were their prospective co-workers. Anyway, if you're ever considering a job, ask 1 or 2 of the current employees what it's like to work there. And if they refuse to answer or seem evasive, just run away. Story 63. It's rare I have anything to add to these, but I got one that works for this. First job I ever interviewed for took place in the dingy back room with the guy I'd been in contact with and some woman I'd never even met. They more or less hired me on the spot, but I was never introduced to anyone else in the office. I worked there for exactly a day, and in that time I was shoved into a little area in the front that was behind a makeshift wall, so I couldn't see anyone else in the office. They told me that I could arrive an hour late so that they could set up the computer for me. But when I got there was still an Invader Zim background on the Chrome from the last person that did my job. They also wanted me to write about outdated wind turbine parts. But more often than not, I had to use their biggest competitor's website to find pictures of the part. And no, this wasn't something I figured out after the fact. The woman from before Out and Out told me that's what it was. Oh, and the guy I started with was there for all of an hour before he stepped out for a phone call and never returned. So yeah, pay attention to Indeed reviews, folks. Story 64. Here are a few from personal experience. You'll be doing a bit of everything. Means enjoy the undocumented responsibility of doing 4 to 5 jobs for the pay of a fraction of 1. We're like a family here. Means we expect you to treat this job as a priority, even over your own family, including working on your downtime. We are a bit understaffed at the moment. Means we have a terrifyingly high turnover rate, largely due to our subpar treatment of our employees. Yeah, you'll learn as you go. Means little to no training, enjoy your anxiety attacks at your station, or incompetent coworkers. Schedules sometimes shift a little, but we'll work with you. Means your schedule may as well not exist. You will be called in nearly daily to cover crap your employees who called off and will rarely get overtime for it. Edit. Speaking as a recent college grad, I will add this subtle red flag. Schedule errors are unacceptable ever. I had a manager forget or mistake my class times almost 6 times in 2 months. Told her outright I was no longer showing up, as it was her job to schedule correctly, not mine to fix her mistakes. I don't regret quitting that job. No amount of money is worth your health. Story 65. Oh my gosh, I have so many. I'm applying for jobs and had over 8 interviews just this week. I have already declined some offers for these things. 1. Said they wanted fresh college grads and asked me if I had any bad habits from my previous experience. Then when I asked about pay rate and said they paid below market average, they said it was the market average for those fresh out of college. I asked if I could have higher since I have 3 years experience, and they said no because they saw my experience as bad and something that would have to train me out of. 2. Asked if it was an added position or did someone quit. He said both. They had one contractor working the position. When they tried to permanently hire her, she declined. I asked why and was told she had reported being overworked the entire year, and they did nothing to fix that, so they are hiring 2 people to replace her. Then later said they expected volume to double over the next year. I asked if they were going to hire more people as the year went on, and he said no, 2 people can handle the load for sure. 3. Asked if the interviewer was my potential supervisor, and he said he didn't know who my supervisor would be because they were understaffed for supervisors. The interviewer was acting as a supervisor with a technologist title, aka they expected people to go above and beyond their title and pay rate with no promise of actually paying them for the extra responsibilities. 4. I was told there was no parking for staff, but they had a park and ride system where you parked and used public transit to get to the hospital. I asked if they paid for the parking ticket, an extra 30 minutes that would add, and they said absolutely not. The commute went from 20 minutes to 50, and I already said my commute limit was 30 minutes. They interviewed me knowing it would take 30 minutes to get from the parking lot to the building. They seemed interested enough to make a new, higher position for me, but not to pay for their crappy parking situation. 5. I was interviewing for a COVID lab position, and it was listed as permanent. Other COVID lab positions I applied for have all been 6-month contracts, so I asked about the permanent thing, and they said, oh, actually, you'll be working for 3 labs simultaneously. We just listed COVID since it is the most involved. I already worked for the company, and they normally have 1 QA person per lab. I asked, and they basically said they don't have enough funding for these 3 people, so they are just hiring 1. So I'm supposed to be doing 3 jobs for the price and time of 1? No thank you. 6. I asked about COVID precautions, and they said they require masks in the lab, and most people do. And when I asked what happens when they don't wear masks, the reply was, what are you going to do? I told them to wear masks, and they don't. It is what it is. You're the boss. Take control of your employees, maybe? My state mandates masks for all inside work, so it's kind of illegal for them to not wear masks. Story 66. I'll make my post before I get lost in the meta, XD. This is a good one. Very good question and very good thing to be aware of. If they dig on personal details like how far away you live, how big your family, how old is your car, how healthy you are, if I think of more, I'll add how far away your family support group is, how often you drink or smoke or eat or consume anything, how often you work out. Just lie and say I do yoga and resistant bands 3 times a week at home. These things can be used against you after you start. Example, your car is old, you've been working here almost a year. Go get yourself something nice. They're either trying to lock you in by forcing you to need them for their money to pay for your new car, or trying to figure out what you spend your money on. All of this is illegal. Personal details like that cannot be asked in an interview. I brought it up once. That's an illegal question, and I do not have to answer that. The response was along the lines of, we don't hire people with more than 1 kid. Not a company I want to work for anyway. They would have bled me out and the next guy would have had to work around my carcass. Coincidentally, that company went under a few years later. Watch out for timekeepers. I am good with deadlines to a point. I am not a to the minutes kind of person. I purposely walked into an interview 2 minutes after, and Buddy says, you're late. I said, then you're looking for someone else. In construction, you need a day, not a minute. Definitely some jobs are to the minutes, and that needs to be respected. So in the same hand, if that's what you're looking for and Buddy tells you to be there at 12, you've got to wait 10 for your time. They are going to blame you for everything that's not your fault. I've also read stories here on Reddit. This guy saw that red flag and it tried it anyway. 3 months in, their hiring manager threw them under the bus and they got fired. Thought of this as I was making the skip the fluff. This is what I mean. If they are overexcited about you and your life and offer you stuff, they will enter your life and never leave. This kind of toxic is very hard to shake. They're like a car salesman that keeps bringing you in and showing you all the good you could have if you just bring a little more to the table, and a little more and a little more and a little more until you're working 14 hours a day, and 4 hours after you get home and eat and sleep, you do it all over again. They know how to talk, manipulate, and get whatever they want because they've made you feel like you're going to get some huge reward, when actually they don't even give you a raise. LOL, you could use the salt in there to dry baste a veal. Don't look up veal if you don't know, it's a big food. There are basic personality flags I've seen. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I like to work with people I like, even if it's a task I hate doing. I would rather clean garbage with 5 people that can make me laugh than do something simple with people I can't stand. That's who I am, and I just realized the points I made are a little biased. Hopefully you can go through it to see what I mean. Feel free to ask questions. Too long didn't read. Most personal questions should not be asked in an interview. More personal, more bad. Try and ask them questions about what you like. A good response is thumbs up. Too much of a good response means they want to be your friends and guilt trip you into working extra for nothing. Story 67. There are a few I've come across over my professional life. Referring to prospective employees as rock stars is usually code for overworked and underpaid. Describing workplace training as a trial by fire was often code for 1/3 of our training is taught, the rest you have to work out for yourself, and will harass you until you finally get it right. Some work I've taken was through an agency. Some work I discovered independently would explicitly state no agencies. This usually meant that the client was grossly underpaying, and they knew it. It only happened in 2 cases that I can think of, but each company emphasized customers first one too many times, which ended up translating to our clients will abuse you and we expect you to let them. Story 68. 2 experiences that were like major red flags. One job related and one culture related. When you ask about wages and they respond with any answer, including our top earners or up to, really reevaluate how much extra work you are willing to do before you accept the position. No disrespect to salespeople, I've been one, I did okay for myself, but it is extremely draining, especially when you have to woo your clients at all hours rather than, say, working in a commission-based retail environment. Most people are not going to be top earners or make anywhere close to the top end of what they could. Sales is not for the faint of heart or slackers. The only people who succeed in sales are good salespeople and con artists. Culture related, if they bring up anything you are against in the interview or make you feel uncomfortable, just leave. One of the car sales positions I interviewed for was at a well-known chain of Honda dealers. Walking in as the only female employee were at the desk, it was the only men on the floor, which isn't unusual. When I interviewed, the manager was not focused on my job history or selling stats. He did not ask me questions about selling or even about cars. At the end, he derailed the conversation talking about his family's restaurant and said, I'm really just doing this interview as a formality for HR. I can't hire you and have you distracting all the guys out there," while staring at my modestly dressed chest. Obviously, I didn't get the job, but there would have been a heck to gnaw if he had offered. Story 69. I don't know if it was subtle, but it was definitely a red flag. Well, several, actually. I had a job interview at a grocery store. They paged the manager when I got there, but he didn't come over for a good 5 minutes. When he did, he didn't greet me at all. Just said, "Come on," and walked quickly upstairs, leaving me at the bottom. I had to figure out where he had gone. He was very short, and really the entire interview consisted of him questioning how I could come to work if I lived so far away. I had already been approved for a house, I just needed to make sure I had a job before I moved. He didn't ask me any normal questions and pretty much told me that if I got hired, what the next steps would be, but did not get my hopes up. Surprising no one, I didn't get hired. I've been with the company that I interviewed with after that for 3 years now. A fun little side note, he's come into my place of work frequently, and I think he's just a very unhappy individual. And that's somehow the rest of the world's fault? I really dodged a bullet there. Story 70. Do you guys offer any benefits? Medical, dental, etc.? Well, we actually haven't set up a benefit system yet, but I always offer learning opportunities. Sometimes I'll even take all the employees to seminars and whatnot, so it's great if you're looking to expand your knowledge, I guess. 1. There was an hour of unpaid lunch. I repeatedly insisted that I would rather forego it because I would usually just bring my own lunch and scarf it down in 10 minutes before getting back to work. Refused, so I would just finish my lunch and spend the rest of my break trying to catch up with the gladiator workload, unpaid. 2. On my second shift, she invited us all for lunch. I mentioned that I had brought my own lunch and that I was okay. but she forced me to come. Come on, it's your second day. You have to come with us. Let's get to know each other. Takes us to some super overpriced hippie garbage restaurant around the corner. I'm like, whatever, it's free. Only once we're almost at the front of the lineup does she say, by the way, you are to pay for your own lunch. Don't forget that. I didn't want to look cheap, so I paid around $15 for possibly the nastiest sandwich I've ever had in my life. Nuts on goat cheese. I wish I had found this thread earlier. I have so many stories to share from that place alone. Story 71. A way too dressed, make-upped woman interviewing me for a production job. We don't want you to be stressed. I'll do all the ordering of supplies and whatnot. This job should be fun, right? Bullcrap. As soon as I was hired, I realized she was in the position she was because her husband was her boss. Conflict of interest much? Who would funnel in other people from other departments to help out when busy when they didn't have anyone in their department because she was too incompetent to keep other people. You were left to keep your head above water till you inevitably drowned because you had no help in at least a 3-person operation you were left to do on your own with customer service and sales reps up your butt 24/7. But I don't want you to be stressed. F you, Tiffany, I was stressed. Story 72. The organization retains the rights to change the conditions of agreement as and when required. The timings are X to X, but the company retains the right to change the timings as and when required by business. By the way, this is for a developer job. A clause in the agreement document that the agreement was confidential and could not be shared with anyone. From what I know, this practice continues along with another where it is illegal for the employee to discuss compensation with other employees. Access to the bank accounts to make debits, i.e. take money. This one's supposedly because some people took loans from the business. Couldn't they add this clause when the individual was taking the loan? I don't know. Lack of clear communication if there are going to be delays in the interview. Generally, this means they are either unorganized or simply like the power to make people late. The first one is from India, from an international IT consulting firm with over 40,000 employees back in 2008. Then they used this clause to get all employees to work 2 hours more for the next year when '08 hit. There is also a tale that when the government suggested this wasn't appropriate, they responded saying they could just set a precedent and take their business elsewhere. China, Philippines, South America, and India would lose over 15% of the GDP over the next decade. Obviously, everyone just shut up. Slavery is dead. Viva la slavery! Story 73. I once went to interview for a senior engineering position, and the 2 managers interviewing me kept yawning and were super unenthusiastic about the interview. They said they were interested in hiring me. I just had to complete their entry test, which would take me a day or 2. I kindly declined. Was not about to waste a couple of days of my life on that. Another engineering firm I interviewed at outright told me that they think I'm too smart to work there, and they think I'd get bored and resign after just a few months. I was kind of shocked, but a few months later, a friend of mine who started working there quit because he got super bored. I appreciated their honesty. Dodged a bullet, I guess. Story 74. When I graduated from therapist grad school, it was June 2009, and there was a recession, you might recall. It being summer, all of the therapist master's programs in the area just simultaneously graduated all their classes of freshly minted, entry-level, master-level clinicians into a hiring wasteland. The law for postgrad master-level clinicians in this state is that you can only be employed by Department of Public Health licensed facilities and a few other sort of institutions, which meant we all had to take jobs from the same limited supply of social service agencies, hospitals, and schools, all of which only had so many jobs and not enough to go around. All of which is to set the stage. I have never been in a more competitive hiring environment. It was utterly the employer's market. I get a lead on a position from a classmate of mine. He puts my resume in at the clinic he works for. They want me to interview. The interview is with the clinic director, and it is 2 hours long, during which the director asks me all of 3 questions. One of which is, did you bring a copy of your resume? And another of which was a simple yes or no question. The entire rest of the 2-hour interview was the director giving me what amounts to a sales pitch, trying to convince me to take the position at this clinic. She also names a compensation rate. Afterwards, I ask around and find out from my friends in the biz that the offer was about 25% higher than industry standard. I later observed to my friends, I have no idea what is wrong with this job, but something has to be terribly, terribly wrong with it. They're acting completely desperate to hire in the middle of a recession during the months of the job market flooded with recent grads who are all but knifing each other in parking lots for the job. I took the job, of course, and yeah, it was a total crap show. Story 75. We had a new teammate. I felt bad for him because within a week we were all telling him how much we hated our company and job. On the bright side, our team is really close, and our manager is the only reason any of us have stayed. We're all looking for new jobs currently. I felt bad he had to start that way, but glad he got to know us all. The ironic part is, his previous job got outsourced. Right when he started with us, our company announced a partnership with an outsourcing company. On the flip side, a white flag. I had interviewed at a local company. I kind of bombed the technical interview, but they still made me an offer. It was all over the phone, and I said I wanted to see the main office and who my teammates would be before I took it. They scheduled a time and let me come by. The team lead and half the team gave me personal tours of the entire office. They were extremely nice, very laid back, talked about routine outings, and had all been there for about 5 to 7 years, and were still happy. I didn't take the job for some personal reasons, unrelated, but honestly it was a really positive experience, and I hope they're all well. I wonder what life would be like if I had taken it. Story 76. I once was job hunting in the restaurant industry. I had printed off my CV, and generally I would drop them off at places I'd like to work. That way, if there was a position opening up, I was likely to get in first. One occasion, I was just checking my CV outside the front of this restaurant, and a page was missing. Someone I had worked with in the past walked past me to say hi, and I got ushered towards the owner of this restaurant who started talking to me. He asked me about my CV, which I explained was missing a page, and then he asked me where I was working. I explained I was leaving due to the current owners telling me if I didn't like the working conditions, they'd suggest I'd find another job. Working conditions being underpaid and not even given a contract or correct pay for the position. My fault. To my shock, this guy unleashed at me, telling me I shouldn't slag off my employer and I hadn't even come prepared with the correct paperwork. I quickly left with no intention of stepping foot in that place. Story 77. In hindsight, going to an interview for a position and they ask if you could possibly take a different area because they need someone back there is kind of a red flag. I interviewed for the front desk position at the local SPCA, and the manager convinced me to take a kennel technician position instead. Figured out within the first few days that they never had any intention to keep me past 90 days. Constantly lectured about how it was so hard to pay everyone minimum wage, so if I wanted to stay past 90 days, I had to be the best employee they'd ever had, while also extolling how the people who had been there for over 10 years could get my job done so much faster. I had to be done at 2 p.m. or else I'd be written up, but the longtime workers could deliberately move animals around at 1:50. If I didn't re-clean those cages, I'd get written up for not doing it, but if I did clean them, I'd get written up for going into overtime. Also was written up for not doing stuff that I was never informed existed that I was apparently supposed to do. On my days off, they would have 3 of the other workers do my job, or one who would clock out for lunch at 2 p.m. and continue working. The other girl, months later, who also applied for front desk, was asked if she could take over the adoptable kennel areas for a while, until they hired someone for back there. She was back there for 2 weeks. Then her first paycheck was $8 an hour. Instead of the 11 hours she was told, "You agreed to be a kennel technician." Apparently, only the manager's favorites were allowed to be front desk. Man, they did a lot of shady crap there. Story 78. I'm a teacher and I was interviewing for my former position. The principal who contacted me and we emailed back and forth before my demo and in-person interview. It was sweet, supportive, and polite. He was very excited about my knowledge and experience. I show up to the demo. It goes great and then sat down for a 3-hour interview. In hindsight, this was too long. But an assistant principal was also there and she was going to be my immediate supervisor. She was cold, stared me down and not inviting at all and made me uncomfortable. I think her demeanor was glaring because the other principal was just the opposite. Anyway, I got the job and her personality never changed. She made me miserable and when I told her, so she asked me to read what was in her heart, not what was on her face. And maybe you read this and think I'm too sensitive, but imagine having her observing me while I'm teaching and she's making faces and rolling her eyes while I taught. I quit a few months ago after they refused to enforce better COVID protocols. I gave them a week's notice and they told me my last day was the day I was emailing them. And when I spoke to HR about what would happen if I had a quiz in mid-June, would I still get paid until the end of my contract in mid-August? This is how charter school contracts work. She told me no, they would have me paid out. This is also a way to avoid paying for accrued PTO, so I'm glad I'm out of there. Story 79. I actually interviewed at a medical marijuana card sales place. Some flags. 2 morbidly obese dudes interviewed me, talking about health. When I say morbidly obese, I'm not joking. One of them could fit behind their desk, and the other guy had to sit on the other side of the room. That is how large these dudes were. Like they were almost 600-pound life status. But of course, one of the first sentences that came out of their mouth is that they strive to be leaders in the new health industry, and went on about their own chronic pain and how marijuana saved them. And now they live wonderful, pain-free, active lives. When they told me what the yearly salary was, I was kind of impressed. But then they elaborated. You don't get that pay unless you work 10 hours of overtime every week. Everyone is expected to work 50 hours a week, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. every single day. One of the dudes said that his son is a teenager who is autistic, bipolar, and schizophrenic, and he got him off of pharma drugs because doctors can't be trusted. So he put his son on the weed. In fact, he was proud of this when he said it, and kind of smug. Again, we don't trust doctors and that evil big pharma, but the doctor in this office is the best. She can absolutely be trusted. She's here once every 2 weeks. I've only been here 3 weeks myself, and they gave me anti-vax vibes. I noped the F out of that place. Story 80. This is a red flag that I missed that I really wish I had taken into consideration. Context. I am a certified lifeguard, WSI, lifeguard manager, and lifeguard instructor. I was looking for a job after the summer ended, and one of my close friends said the place he worked was looking for lifeguards and swim instructors. I met the manager for an interview, and he offered me only $14 an hour, just above minimum wage in my state. I asked for at least 15, since I had many certifications and 5 years experience, and I was told that 14 was the highest they could go. I ended up taking the job since my friend worked there, so I figured it couldn't be that bad. Over the next few months, I was terribly overworked, treated very poorly by management, and the company would use any excuse they could to take money from me. For example, when I was teaching swim lessons, if a child didn't show up one day and didn't call ahead to cancel, I wouldn't get paid. I wasn't paid directly by the parents, just hourly by the company. One day, most of my kids were no-shows, so I stayed 5.5 hours to only be paid for 2 of them. I was also one of maybe 3 people that was actually certified as a lifeguard, out of the 30 or so people working there. And I was the only one with WSI, lifeguard management, or lifeguard instructor certifications. I was promised a raise come January when minimum wage rose, but then was later told my salary would stay exactly the same. So really, I'd just go from above minimum wage to a new minimum wage. I ended up leaving after I realized I wasn't enjoying it and thought I could get better pay. I just accepted a job offer for $21.50 an hour with much more flexible hours and easier work, more than 1.5 what I was making before. Moral of the story, know your worth and don't settle for less when you think you deserve it. Story 81. I was working with an indie game studio as a modeler, texture artist. It was just for fun and making contacts. The game we were working on started picking up traction and had studios looking to pick us up. The lead on the project immediately got together with an attorney and drafted up contracts. Not a problem. I got mine, but there wasn't a rush, and since I had to do regular work for bills, I kind of ignored it for a couple of days. The lead and his attorney started bombarding me with emails, telling me to sign it. I replied with, "After I read it, I'll let you know." I immediately got a phone call from the attorney, assuring me it was all just standard stuff, and if I wanted to secure my position in the studio, I should just sign it. Red flags everywhere. So when I had time, I read it, and boy, am I glad I did. It stated that anything I worked on in my personal time, which I did a lot as an artist, was now their property, and I had no rights to even show it. If I left the studio for any reason, I couldn't work in the video games industry for a minimum of 12 months. Even though I was working for free, I was not allowed to take a paid position at any other game studio while working with them. The list went on. I told them I wasn't going to sign that, and if they pressed, I was leaving. They pressed. I left. Find later that the lead started the studio, hired people, then drained the accounts, sold the hardware, locked the doors, and never returned. Story 82. One interview I walked in, HR rep takes me to the conference room. She goes and gets the guy I'd be working for, who was nice, asked a couple experience questions. I answered, and he seemed satisfied and leaves. Dude looked exhausted, flat out tired. HR rep then proceeded to ask me if I would take 10% less than I asked for. I politely asked her why they brought me in if they weren't willing to pay me what I stated I needed to make a switch, because I didn't need the job, I already had one. She said they just couldn't go that high, but they really needed the help of someone experienced like me, so the job was mine if I wanted it. Then proceeded to explain how great their insurance was. I thanked her for her time and left. Another job I interviewed for through a contract agency and got, when I went to sign the paperwork at the agency, one of the papers was a non-compete agreement stating that if the contract was terminated by either party, I couldn't work for anyone else for 12 months other than that agency. I didn't sign it and turned it in blank, mixed in with other paperwork. A couple hours later, I get a call telling me I needed to come back and sign it. Told the guy I'm not doing it. The next day, I get a call from another agency about the same job. Apparently, the company that wanted me didn't like the terms on their end either and switched agencies. Later that day, I got a call from the owner of the first agency telling me he was going to come after me for losing the contract for him and that he was going to pray that my future endeavors go oh so poorly. Story 83. I do the chef thing. Recently back in the market in Florida, from Chicago, have had a lot of interviews lately. Some of the worst I said no to. It's an easy job. I'm surprised we're having such a hard time finding someone to fill the position. 6 days a week for $35K. Can you get here sooner for your interview? I need to go get a haircut. After he has rescheduled my interview 2 times and then just said sometime between 3 and 5, I just had to fire 2 people and 2 others quit. They just couldn't handle the pressure. After claiming to be an extremely easy person to get along with and work with, I tried to look up some of the places you listed on your resume. I couldn't find them. How do I even know you're qualified? A quick Google search will easily find all of those. I see you worked at X. I'm good friends with one of the chefs who worked there. Do you mind if I call her? Received a text from said chef the morning of my interview and said she got a phone call the night before. Can you come in for an interview at 10:30? I get there for my interview. He's in the middle of interviewing someone else. No problem. Tells me to come back in an hour and has 3 other people to interview before me. I understand I'm not the only person who applied for the job, but don't schedule all the interviews at the same time, huh? I'm sure there's a handful more, but these are the ones that'll stick out when I tell my interview horror stories for years to come. Story 84. This happened to me. I got a call about a position that I hadn't applied for, but I had been on the job site in that field, so I didn't think it was totally outlandish that they called. I interviewed, and the first red flag was when the woman interviewing me, who was the director of this small independent daycare center, said she liked my resume and showed me a printed summarized version of my actual resume. Obviously, this had been downloaded from the job site, but I should have offered my own copy, which was always on resume paper and clearly the complete version. Red flag number 2 was when she says, "I'm the best boss ever." She then proceeds to give me a tour of the center. It was cute, I liked it. Was hired for a brand new position that no one knew I was hired for. I was hired as a curriculum coordinator and assumed people were aware of this. I started asking employees what they currently did for curriculum and lesson planning, and everyone freaked out because they thought I was trying to take their jobs. After 2 years, the director pulls me in her office and accuses me of forging my resume. It was so out of left field. I asked to see what resume she actually has, as I never gave her one. She shows me that summary from the job site, which listed my school and my major, Master of blank, on my actual resume. I was very clear in stating that I had 1 class left for this degree. She then cut my pay, saying that I didn't have the degree she was paying me for. I told her to have a nice day, and I quit on the spot. Story 85. Senior software developer here. The interviewer, one of the company partners, showed up 30 minutes late and offered me the job as soon as the interview began, based solely on the former colleague's recommendation. Seemed genuinely surprised when I asked questions on what I was supposed to be doing. He also seemed a bit distracted and bored. During the so-called interview, he proceeded to explain that they had tried to outsource the job, but people from third world countries were not fit for that type of job and did not work hard enough. In fact, he probably meant that they were not available for unpaid overtime. When I left, the offices were still half full 2 hours after the usual COB, and I didn't see many happy faces around. So hard pass. A few years later, a close friend of mine went to work there and left after less than 6 months. He confirmed the place was a radioactive pile of trash, with people backstabbing each other instead of cooperating. I wasn't shocked. Story 86. Asked me to come in at 4 p.m. that day, knowing I had a full-time job. Asked for a writing sample on top of my resume, totally normal. And when I sent 5 pages, asked me for 10 to 15 more. The actual interview went well. They emailed and asked me if I could start the next day, after I told them I would need to put in 2 weeks at my existing job. Then the kicker. The salary was posted at 30 to 35K. They offered me 30K, which was less than I was making, so I countered with 33K. They sent me an email saying, "We can't accommodate that. Good luck with your job search." Aside from the meeting in person, it was the weirdest, most unprofessional interview experience I've ever had. So glad I dodged that bullet. I knew someone who worked there, and she warned me about the job, but I needed a change and was willing to take some crap for something new. She told me they loved me in the interview, but that my salary request just upset all the bosses off. Story 87. I got 2 from my personal experience. First was for a big box retail store. Interview was at 1. Girl I talked to had no clue they were doing interviews that day. Waited about 15 minutes until they could determine who was interviewing me. 15 minutes later, someone else interviewed me. That lack of organization was unimpressive, and even though I'd been out of work for 2 weeks at the time, I walked out of there and said, I am not working here. Second was for an EMT security guard position at a retirement home. The guy interviewing me didn't ask me any questions and just told me about the awesome things he's done for the place. Another thing that kind of stuck out was that he said if I requested time off that I'd have to find people to cover my hours. I remember thinking, isn't scheduling kind of your job? Overall, just smarmy vibe from the place too. Overall, kind of the same place with buying a car off Craigslist. The car never sketched me out, the guy selling it did. Story 88. I told the interviewer, manager, that I enjoy where I work and my job. He responded with a mini rant about not wanting employees who throw parties and drink on the job, and made it clear you come to work and not have fun. I politely declined the would-be promotion. Not sure who he hired in the past, but I still stand by my desire to enjoy my job. Had a job offer for a manager who expected me to leave work in Washington on Friday afternoon and be ready for my first day early Monday morning in South Carolina. When I asked about moving myself and my belongings, he shrugged and said, "Figure it out, hire a moving company." When I turned down that opportunity to be closer to my soon-to-be husband, my then current boss chastised me for embarrassing him and dismissing the work he did to get me that offer. And yes, that was on point for his lack of leadership skills as well. Now my boss is a 3-year-old, and I couldn't be happier. Story 89. Employees casually talk crap about the job in front of the interviewees. Our company is like a family. Interviewer will discuss everything except the actual job, your pay and benefits, recent downsizing or restructuring, must be available nights and weekends. On call. Interviewer has an attitude problem. Interviewer trying to be your best friend. Interviewer constantly interrupted by upper management. Story 90. Had an interview for a part-time GP surgery receptionist role. I interviewed with the principal doctor and the practice manager. There was a weird undercurrent of tension between the two of them the whole time. They bickered about different points, including their flexibility with regards to me having a young child, i.e. time off for emergencies if any occurred. I got asked some roundabout questions by the PM that made it feel like she wanted to know if I was planning to have any more children. I took the job because I was sure it couldn't be worse than the situation I was working in. A year and a half and 1 pandemic later, and the principal GP has retired for health reasons, and it turns out she was the only thing holding back the power-mad, micromanaging control freak that is the PM. Oh well, at least I'll be getting the vaccine soon. You never know what you're going to find out there in the workforce. Guys, that concludes our stories of subtle red flags to look out for when interviewing for a job. If you have any tips or tricks you want to share with the rest of us, feel free to drop those down below because I will be checking them out because I would like to be on my toes going forward. Thanks again for hanging out with me and reading through these stories, and we will see you in the next one.